Okay, at the end of the last video, we had 4 endpoints, but we hadn't really added any validations to the responses, only to the parameters. For this video, I'm going to show off some of the magical one-click JSON schema generation features, and we can also add a few non-GET requests to our OpenAPI spec. So if we start off with the getUser endpoint, we can see that it's got a pretty complex nested structure. Top-level elements, a nested address, and company information. This would be a huge pain to type in manually as a JSON schema, but luckily Callosum has some magic up its sleeve. If we go over to the Schema tab here, we see there's nothing yet, but we can use the drop-down to go to Analyze. This looks at that response content, generates a JSON schema to match it. The schema is automatically associated with both the 200 response code and with the JSON content type. It's pretty slick. We can do the same for the list users endpoint. So if I click send, we have some content to analyze. We go to schema and analyze. We have the same thing. So you can see all the properties for the object type here for the users, and that it's properly wrapped in an array type. So that's pretty handy, but let's say that now we want to create a user. We'll add a new create user endpoint. It uses the post verb to /users. So we'll see that it's basically the same setup here. We've just got post, and we have this request body section with nothing yet defined. We'll add the JSON content type, and we can see that by default there's no JSON content, but we can edit the schema for it. I've gone ahead and copied and pasted that get schema from our get users, and now we can see I've got a full schema for the request. If I toggle back to the request content, you'll see that Callosum has now automatically given me a template based on that JSON schema. So I know all the different fields that are available to be posted. So I'll go ahead and add in my email address. I can leave the rest of these blank because this is just a placeholder API, but I'll click send here and we can see that the placeholder has mimicked my request back to me and given me a user ID. So that's pretty cool. All right, let's go ahead and just tag that with our users tag. And let's go complete the whole trifecta here and add a endpoint for deleting users. So we'll go ahead and add a delete. It'll be /users/user ID with that path variable. And we can just mimic all of this again. Again, the JSON placeholders API is not going to actually delete anything, but it's going to pretend that it did and give us a 200 response code. I'm going to go ahead and make sure to get that one also tagged. So now if we go to our posts, we can basically round out all the rest of this also. So I'll make sure that we have a schema for our list posts. I'll go over to our get post and we'll add a post ID for it. Hit send. Remember again that we have a free trial period. We would really appreciate it if you purchased a license for this tool. Help support our future development. And we can see the post content here for this, which we will also analyze. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new create post endpoint. We're going to do this one slightly different than we did for users. So I'll add that JSON content type. And now I'm going to copy and paste the actual request JSON content instead of the schema. So in this case, since this is creating a post, we're not going to have an ID available. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that row from our example. And if I go over to edit schema, you'll see, again, as usual, we have nothing here yet, but I can impute that schema from that content I just pasted. So if I look at this, I can see we've still got our body and our title and our user ID, but since it used that content that I just copied and we deleted the ID, it's not including the post ID itself. So we can switch back to content. We can hit send, and remember that JSON placeholders API is going to mimic creating that content and automatically assigning me a post ID. So just for good measure, we'll go ahead and analyze this and make sure we get a 201 created schema for our response. So I'll make sure I tag that as a post. And to finish out all of our features, we're going to add a delete post as well. So this is just delete /post ID. And we're done. Just to test it out for goodness. All right, so now we've got 8 endpoints in total, and our OpenAPI spec is getting pretty lengthy. We've got a lot of duplication in here, right? So a user type here for our get user. We've also got a user type here for our post and our request body. And we've got the user type inside of that array for list users. All of this duplication results in a really lengthy OpenAPI spec. And if only there was a way that we could extract all those schemas and put them into a single point in the OpenAPI spec. So one way that we can do that, and this is a beta feature at the moment, is we go to the Analyze menu and hit Extract Schemas. You'll see nothing really looks like it changes here. But what we can do is we can go to something like our list users endpoint and hit send. And if we tab over to that schema, again, we'll see that we now have a reference to our component schema for users. So Callosum has, underneath the hood, transparent to every other feature of the UI, extracted the identical schemas across all of the different requests and named them according to where they came from. So in this case, this was a user schema, and we know that it's now inside of that array. And we'll see that even with our get, if we go back to the schema tab, a 200 get will also return a user response. So if we go to the OpenAPI spec itself, we can go into our component section, which has been newly created, and it has all of the different schemas that were detected by Callosum. So we can see our user schema is here. We also have a post schema. And if we collapse this component section, we can scroll down to our endpoints and see that those are actually converted to references within each of the different endpoints. So this is our get. It returns an array of posts. We see that our post for creating posts actually did not use a ref because it only occurred once. This particular schema doesn't have the ID, so it doesn't match the ref for all the other posts. But we can see the response does match. And we can keep scrolling through all these and see all of the different opportunities that it found to shorten the size of our OpenAPI spec. So we see our users do make it in quite a few other places. So that's pretty slick, and we see that we've greatly reduced the length of our OpenAPI spec and reduced the complexity in making changes to these content types. Stay tuned for the next video to see more about security, authentication, and some of the other more advanced features.